You've seen this map 1,000 times, but it's not telling you the whole story. It presents this picture of a balanced world with sprawling continents and vast oceans. But that's not really the case. The truth is far more lopsided. What if I told you that the vast majority of humanity, over 80% of us, is packed into just one half of the planet? And what if I told you this wasn't some historical accident, but the result of a geographic game of chance played tens of thousands of years ago? The story of our world is the story of an unequal planet. It all comes down to a roll of the geographic dice, ancient barriers that sealed the fate of continents, and the waterways that would go on to define who held global power. This is the story of the Eastern Hemisphere, and why it became the supercharged center of the human universe. Let's be clear about what we're looking at. This isn't just some random circle drawn on a map. We're talking about the Eastern Hemisphere, the half of the Earth stretching from the prime meridian in Greenwich, London, all the way to the 180-degree longitude line in the Pacific. This single half contains all of Africa, Asia, Australia, and most of Europe. For all practical purposes, it's the Old World, the cradle of nearly every ancient civilization we learn about, from the Nile Valley to Mesopotamia to the Indus River. And it is crowded. Of the roughly 8.2 billion people on Earth, around 6.8 billion of them live here. This hemisphere doesn't just have most of the people. It also holds the majority of the world's landmass. It's a place of staggering diversity, from the frozen tundra of Siberia to the rainforests of the Congo, from the searing Arabian desert to the mild climates of Western Europe. The sheer scale of this imbalance is hard to wrap your head around. It means that for most of human history, the collective story of the Western Hemisphere, all of North and South America, was shaped by a tiny fraction of the global population. So the big question is why? Why did one half of the world get such a colossal head start, becoming an engine for civilization while the other remained sparsely populated and, for millennia, totally cut off? The answer doesn't start with people. It starts with the land itself. Picture the dawn of agriculture, about 12,000 years ago. It's humanity's greatest gamble. Small groups of people are figuring out that they can plant seeds and grow crops, meaning they no longer have to constantly chase their food. This is the moment that plants the seeds of civilization itself, leading to permanent settlements, surplus food, and growing populations. But where this revolution could spread depended on a shockingly simple feature of geography: the shape of the continents. Take a look at the biggest landmass in this hemisphere, Eurasia. Its main axis runs east-west. The geographer and historian Jared Diamond famously argued that this orientation was maybe the single most important factor in all of human history. Why? Because places at the same latitude share similar day lengths, similar seasons, and often similar climates. This meant that a crop domesticated in the Fertile Crescent, like wheat, could spread west to Europe and east to India with relative ease. It was traveling along the same basic climate band. The same was true for domesticated animals. Horses, cows, and sheep, first tamed in one part of Eurasia, could move and thrive across thousands of miles. This east-west axis created a gigantic, uninterrupted highway for food, animals, technology, and ideas. The wheel, writing, and military innovations that popped up in one society could ripple across the supercontinent on the back of this agricultural wave. Now, compare that to the Americas. Their axis is north-south. A crop that thrived in the temperate climate of North America would hit a wall in the tropical heat of Central America. And an animal adapted to the high Andes, like the llama, could never make it across the sweltering, disease-filled jungles of Panama to get to the north. The Americas were, in effect, a series of climatic islands, cut off from each other by tough environmental barriers. This put a massive brake on the spread of agriculture and technology. While Eurasia was becoming an interconnected web of booming civilizations, the Americas were a patchwork of brilliant, but separate, developments that couldn't easily build on each other. Africa, too, has a major north-south axis, with the Sahara Desert and dense tropical zones acting as huge barriers. This initial roll of the geographic dice gave Eurasia a head start that lasted for millennia. It wasn't that its people were smarter, it was that their best ideas could travel. And while some modern studies add more nuance, suggesting other cultural and ecological factors were also at play, they confirm just how crucial geography was. The stage was set. One half of the world was connected, and the other was fragmented. The luck of the land was only part of the story. The other part was the curse of isolation, enforced by the planet's biggest barriers. For tens of thousands of years after humans first crossed the Bering Strait into the Americas, the two hemispheres might as well have been on different planets. The Pacific and Atlantic weren't highways. They were immeasurable, terrifying voids. This total isolation had huge consequences. The great Eurasian African landmass worked like one gigantic laboratory. When a new disease appeared, it spread, and over generations, populations built up immunities. When a new crop was domesticated, it could be shared. When a new metal was forged, the technique could pass from one empire to the next. The Old World was a crucible of competition and connection, constantly sharpening its technologies, its governments, and its resistance to disease. The Americas, meanwhile, were on their own. They developed incredible civilizations, like the Maya and the Inca, but they did it in a vacuum. They had far fewer large animals that could be domesticated, no horses for cavalry, no oxen to pull plows. And critically, their people had no exposure to the huge library of germs that had been circulating in the dense, interconnected cities of the Old World for centuries. These ancient barriers, the vast oceans, and the climatic walls of a north-south axis, created two completely separate human experiments. One was happening on a sprawling, interconnected stage that was home to most of humanity. The other was happening in a series of magnificent, but separate, theaters. And when those barriers were finally and violently broken in 1492, the lopsided nature of the world became brutally clear. It wasn't a meeting of equals. It was a collision between a supercontinent and an isolated one. If the east-west axis gave the Eastern Hemisphere a head start, mastering its waterways is what kicked its dominance into overdrive. Long before European explorers ever dreamed of crossing the Atlantic, this hemisphere was already stitched together by a complex and buzzing network of maritime trade. The Indian Ocean, right at the heart of this hemisphere, was the single most important maritime highway in the world for over 1,000 years. Predictable monsoon winds acted like a natural engine, letting sailors from Arabia, India, Africa, and Southeast Asia conduct regular, long-distance trade. Spices, silks, and new ideas flowed across these waters, connecting the world's great population centers. To the west, the Mediterranean Sea did the same job, serving as a liquid freeway for civilizations in North Africa, the Middle East, and Southern Europe. And to the east, the South China Sea was a hub of commerce, linking the immense power of Chinese dynasties with the rest of Asia. These waterways created a powerful feedback loop. Trade created enormous wealth, which fueled the growth of powerful port cities and empires. This economic gravity pulled in more people, making these coastal regions even more densely populated. The money from trade then funded new innovations in shipbuilding and navigation, which made trade even more efficient. This hemisphere wasn't just a pile of continents. It was a network of networks. People and power followed the water, and the Eastern Hemisphere had the most connected waters on Earth. It's this deep history that still shapes our world in ways we rarely notice. If you find these hidden forces fascinating, think about subscribing for more deep dives just like this one. It's the best way to support the channel, and you won't miss our next exploration into the invisible patterns that define our lives. So there's our answer. The world is lopsided because of a three-part story. First, the geographic luck of an east-west axis in Eurasia. Second, the profound isolation of the Western Hemisphere. And third, the accelerating power of ancient trade routes that wired the Old World's population centers into a single, dynamic system. This isn't just ancient history. You can see its legacy written all over the modern globe. Many of the world's largest economies and biggest cities are still concentrated in this hemisphere. Think of Tokyo, Delhi, Shanghai, and Cairo. Modern hubs like Singapore and Dubai are just the latest versions of the powerful, trade-focused city-states that have long defined this part of the world. Of course, North America remains a massive economic powerhouse, but the sheer demographic weight of the East still powerfully influences everything from geopolitical conflicts to global supply chains and cultural trends. Even as the world gets more connected, this fundamental imbalance, set in motion thousands of years ago, remains. The map isn't lying to you, but it is hiding the most important story. A story of geographic fortune, of continental shapes, and the immense power of connection versus isolation. The division of our world into two fundamentally different human experiments was one of the most decisive factors in shaping the planet we see today. So the next time you look at a world map, don't just see land and water. See the echoes of ancient migrations, the invisible climate lines that decided where the first farms could grow, and the ghost currents of trade that drew over 80% of humanity to one side of our planet. That is the world as it truly is, beautifully and profoundly lopsided.